Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see you all here. My name is Julia Eels. I'm the head of school at San Francisco University High School. Welcome to the 5th annual UHS Runway Lecture, sponsored by the UHS Alumni Association. I want to thank Mariana Stark for beginning this great idea, which was to highlight a runway that is designed to bring the energy and dialogue around social justice, equity, and inclusion that is happening on the UHS campus and bringing it to life in the alumni conversation across the city and hopefully across the country. We are interested in providing you today and ongoing with inspiration to be change makers at work, in your community, at home, and with friends and family. We've learned a lot in the last 18 to 24 months, and there's nothing like additional inspiration to feel compelled, I guess, to be part of positive change in a time that has felt very challenging and where hope is, I think, frankly, a little more elusive than usual. It is my pleasure to introduce Erin Tartakovsky, class of 2008, to you all. I have to say that takes any educator back when you use the class year 2008, because that feels like a half a second ago, frankly. However, we do know that our graduates go off and do extraordinary things, and that was a while back, and my goodness, Erin has built up such an incredible resume. Erin is co-founder and CEO of Epic Clean Tech, a pioneering sustainability company that is refining how cities use their water resources. Erin is a leading voice on the need to rethink how we design our infrastructure based on the belief that access to clean water and reliable sanitation is indeed a basic human right. And if there's anything you learn at University High School, is that we care deeply about how people understand everyone's right to live a clean and healthy life in our world. Erin previously served as Director of Business Development and Marketing for CB Engineers, where he also ran its Research and Development division. Prior to that, Erin worked in federal politics and has remained active in affecting public policy on the local, state, and national levels. I would love to invite you to my Friday morning current events group, who dig deeply into policy to a point where they completely eclipse me in any ability to manage the conversation except to keep them all civil. But I want you to know that that kind of dialogue is happening at university every week, if not every day in our classrooms. Erin is also a founding partner of J Ventures, serves on the board of governors of Tel Aviv University, and is a proud graduate of the of San Francisco University High School. This year, we are especially proud to feature Erin because we are particularly focused on our science, math, engineering, and design curriculum. There is no doubt that it has been a challenge for all institutions to keep up with the pace of evolution in providing the best kind of instruction and guidance and sense of leadership and agency in the world of science today. Our science offerings at University High School continue to evolve in this fast pace and space. Not long ago, we modified our curriculum so that we begin our science curriculum with 9th grade physics, which is the best foundation. I'm looking at people nodding their heads. In order to move into chemistry and biology, which is the right way to be teaching science. Not only did we add to our program to make it more appropriately structured, we also at that point in time expanded our faculty to support that change. We added as well a design and engineering component to our programming, and it has made a world of difference. We offer a robust set of advanced electives, equivalent in breadth and depth to many college-level courses. And we constantly update our work relative to new discoveries and new technologies as all of that emerges. Last month, we hosted an event introducing an alumni panel in the sciences that was moderated by UHS parent Dr. Deepak Srivastava. He's the president of Gladstone Institutes, and Gladstone, as you may or may not, is an independent nonprofit life science research org. We're so lucky in the city of San Francisco to have the kinds of resources we have in our parent community, in our alumni community. When Deepak was introducing the alumni who were going to be speaking about their work in life sciences, he said, "Science is in the middle of a revolution, and many people liken the change it's going through to the equivalent of the Industrial Revolution." We are in for big change, folks. There has been a convergence of knowledge and technology, and 20 years from now, the paradigms in science will be completely different. It is my pleasure to let you know that in fewer or less than, depending on the way you look at grammar, so in less than 2 years' time, but in fewer than 2 years, we will break ground on a 50,000 square foot building on 3150 California Street that will provide state-of-the-art facilities for our science and engineering programs, as well as enhance our community and athletic spaces. It will allow us to expand access and enrollment and connect our campus to a major transportation hub on California Street. This is the biggest thing that the school has done in terms of a capital project or even a strategic project since the school was founded almost 50 years ago. We have embarked on a historic campaign and have secured just under half of our $52.6 million goal for this building project, as well as other areas of support in financial aid and programming, so that we can ensure the security of our great school into its next 50 years. Securing our future as a leader in providing transformational education that produces alumni like Aaron is the fierce focus of our Board of Trustees and the cornerstone of UHS's strategic design. May this runway podium continue to attract UHS alumni challengers, creators, and revolutionaries, because the world needs them desperately. And we are proud of the role that we played at University High School in launching those change makers. Please join me in welcoming Aaron Tartakovsky to the stage.
Okay. You know, when people get really nice, glowing introductions, oftentimes they say, my mother would be really proud of what that person just said. I actually have the ability to say my mother is here. So, this is really exciting for a lot of reasons. I can, again, thank you to my parents for putting me through University High School, to my brother Adam, who also went to University High School, for showing me what not to do. But, in all seriousness, I look back at my time at University High School a lot. Whether it was on the soccer field, or physics, or Western Civ, learning about Gregorian chants. Does everyone remember Gregorian chants? I think probably the only high schoolers in the country who know what Gregorian chants are. But no, it's really exciting to be here. And when I was getting sort of prepared to make these remarks, I wanted to go into the archives and actually prove that I did go to University High School. Can we see that? Starting striker on the Red Devil soccer team. But, I talk a lot about water, about wastewater, about infrastructure, and I always have fun doing it, but I figured since we're here, all of us are, as we say in Yiddish, mishpocha, we're all family here. I'm going to have a little bit more fun because it is Friday. So, Mariana, thank you for setting this up. I did something which is always scary for organizers, which at the last minute I said, you know what, can I actually have a projector and show some photos? So I did a little curveball. but I promise you it's going to be fun. And so, the name of today's talk is From Politics to Plumbing. So, university encourages people to be big, bold thinkers. I don't think there's anything more bold than having someone come and talk about toilets while people are eating, but here we are. So how did I go from this, this is in Washington, D.C., doing a lot of work, to this, which is me at a wastewater treatment plant in rural Illinois. If you see, we call these in the industry bunny suits. My bunny suit is a little bit dirty. It's a big departure from wearing nice suits to doing this work, but I'll sort of talk about that. But I think what it all comes back to is water. I think what's really, really interesting for me, and let me just quickly check, are there any water industry professionals in the room? One. Okay, so you'll be checking things I say. Perfect. So I bring that up because I am new to the industry, or newish. We've been working at this for about 7 years. But what I learned coming into this world is we live in what we like to call at Epic Cleantech a flush and forget society, which is to say we have designed our infrastructure so well that we never think about what happens after we flush a toilet. When we turn on the tap, we just assume water's going to come out. These are things we take for granted. And again, this is a very American-focused way of thinking. Now, the more and more I learned about this industry, the more I realized that we really need to change that we do not know about our water, wastewater issues until a Flint, Michigan happens. Now, unfortunately, the scary thing is that Flint, Michigan is not a one-off. There are going to be more and more of those as we go forward, as testing gets better. But not to end on a pessimistic note, the good thing is that there are a lot of people and a lot of amazing companies and innovations on this front happening now. This is obviously an interesting moment with the impending vote on the infrastructure bill, the signing of the infrastructure bill, where there's going to be a lot of stuff happening, 55 billion things happening in the water, wastewater world. But, this is probably what most of us hear about right now. We're in the midst of a drought, and we're going to talk a little bit today about what all this means about sort of what we're going to be doing different with our water, wastewater infrastructure in the next 5, 10, 50, 100 years. But I wanted to first start by telling my story about how I got into this world. And we're going to touch upon politics, we're going to touch upon water, we're going to touch a lot of different things. But as all good stories, this one starts with a four-legged little friend named Paulie. Is Paulie on screen? Okay, good. So Paulie is the dog of one of my co-founders. So Oded, my co-founder, was walking down the streets of Tel Aviv one day with his pug Paulie when Paulie did his business on the sidewalk, as dogs do. Oded was on the phone, not paying attention, didn't clean up after the dog. A police officer comes driving by, sees this, writes him up a fine. Him being the fiery tempered Israeli entrepreneur that he is, and if anyone has had interactions with Israelis in business, they'll know what I mean by fiery tempered. Rather than just paying the fine and moving on with his life, decided that he was going to come up with a 21st century solution to clean up after dogs. Not necessarily the most pressing challenge of the day, but a challenge nonetheless. He went to his lab, ended up doing some experiments, came up with essentially what is sort of commonly known as a high-tech pooper scooper device that very quickly converted the dog waste from a wet, smelly waste into a dry, odorless, pathogen-free product, essentially granule that turned out to be good for plants. One of the occupational hazards of my work, working in wastewater, is that no matter who you're talking to, whether it's with a fellow high school student or whether with my lawyers, everyone devolves into their inner middle schooler when you start talking about toilets and water. So this little dog device got the attention of the internet, and then they were approached by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So the Gates Foundation was running something at the time called the Reinvent the Toilet Challenge. And the premise of this challenge is there are 3.5 billion people worldwide who don't have access to clean water and sanitation. And this goes to your point about sort of really making sure everyone has access to these things. And the conventional way we've designed our infrastructure for 200 years is we have buildings connected to sewers, connected off to a central treatment plant. That's how we've essentially done things, even going back all the way to the Romans, of centralized large infrastructure. And even today, the sewers of London and Paris are still visited by tourists all around the world. And a fun fact, which you probably didn't know, is that the most popular day to visit the sewers of Paris is on Valentine's Day. So next time you're in Paris on Valentine's Day, get in line. But so the Gates Foundation basically said, how do we create new solutions that we can spread out to the world quickly? We don't have time to build 200 years of pipes and multi-billion-dollar facilities to catch up with 70% of the world's population living in cities by 2050. How do we move faster? So we looked at the cell phone model, at telecommunications. In a country like the United States, we went from poles and wires to eventually developing cell phone technology, so we don't need a phone connected to a wall. Now we said, can we take that model when it comes to infrastructure, water and wastewater infrastructure, and apply that to a developing world context? So my partners were working with the Gates Foundation, essentially designing high-tech toilets based off of that original device developed for Paulie the pug. And they were then presenting this innovation at a conference in California. In the audience that day was a former Soviet rocket engineer who had moved into the building sciences and said, I wonder if we can take what they're doing for a single toilet and put it into a building. That Soviet rocket engineer is my co-founder / father, Igor, also sitting here in the audience. He did not go to university high school, but still very educated man. And so what we realized was, can we take this and make this the new model for how cities of the future will be designed? And so when I started learning more and more about water and wastewater, at the time I was working in federal politics. And I didn't know anything about water, wastewater, so what did I do? I read books, I went to conferences, and I started talking to anyone who had even the smallest peripheral connection to what it is that we were trying to do. Water, wastewater professionals, scientists, academics, soil scientists, and this is what I learned. This is essentially what our infrastructure looks like if you look on the screen. Does anyone recognize that person in the middle photo? Neither do I. I just figured that's the person who built our pipes. And this is, and again, this is no exaggeration. We lose about 90% of our water due to leaks, due to pipes. We are not as efficient as we need to be. And again, apologies for people who are still eating. On the right is what we do with sludge. This is organics that we collect at wastewater treatment plants. It's not efficient, and it sits giving off emissions, CO2, methane. If you're following what's happening in the news right now in Glasgow, there's a lot of focus on making sure that we are reducing the emissions. The way we're doing things now is just not good enough. These are the big problems. And again, I'm going to kind of breeze through this, but when it comes to infrastructure, we need to repair all of this. There's about $1 trillion price tag to pay for all of the upgrades that we need in our pipes and our facilities. And the only way we pay for that is through raising water and sewer bills on people. On average, we are increasing water and sewer bills in our cities 5, 10, 15% a year. In the last decade, we've raised it 43%, which outpaces any other utility for a household. Now, it's one thing for a family that is able to afford it and can pay for that. Now, if you are struggling going paycheck to paycheck, all of a sudden you're put in a position of, can I pay my water and sewer bill this year? And during this pandemic, we've seen the highest rate of people unable to pay their bills. So there is a huge equity issue here. We can talk even today about, there are areas in this country, there's about 5 million people who don't have access to clean water and sanitation. These are communities in the Rust Belt, for example, trailer parks where they have non-functioning septic systems. They're cutting connections to those systems and discharging raw wastewater into their lawns, and their kids and their dogs are getting sick from things that we thought were long ago eradicated from this country. Again, flush and forget society. We don't hear about these things. That's a problem, part of what we're trying to fix. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what our company does, our technology. It's interesting, it's different, is that we take all of a building's wastewater. So take a high-rise, take a Salesforce tower in downtown San Francisco. There is wastewater produced from showers, from sinks, from toilets. All of these things we typically send into the sewer off to a central treatment plant. We instead say, well, there is no waste in wastewater. We can actually turn wastewater into commodities. We can turn it into clean water that we can recycle back in the building. We can turn it into fertilizer. So all these organics, human waste, food waste that go down sinks, we can turn that into soil and energy. Because we used an incredible amount of energy in our buildings to heat up water for dishwashers, for laundry, for showers. That's just heat that we send into the sewers and we lose it. There is enough wastewater heat that we send into sewers every single year that we could power every single electric vehicle on the road right now by harnessing that energy. We're showing people, again, no waste in wastewater. We can turn all of these things into new commodities. And we're starting with buildings, we're starting with communities, and we can do this much more quickly than a big central treatment plant. Now that we're not replacing the central treatment plants, we work in tandem. So We're talking about University High School, so of course there's going to be a very quick lesson here. This is your water reuse 101. These are all the various sources of water in a building. There's black water, which means organic toilet water. There's gray water, showers, dishwashers. There's rainwater, storm water, air conditioning water. All of these things we typically send off into the sewer. We can instead recapture this and reuse it. So in the case of San Francisco, this is one of our projects. We are in a 40-story high-rise with Related, one of the larger developers in this country. We are actually capturing 5,000 gallons a year, treating that, reusing it. We're helping them reuse about 2 million gallons of water every single year. This is so instead of bringing in fresh drinking water and using that to flush our toilets, we're instead generating clean water right on site that we can reuse. Now we have one water professional. I'm going to go quickly, very, very quickly through what you're seeing here. But first step, remove solids. Step 2, hold all that water. Now that the solids are removed, you pass it through what we're calling here a membrane bioreactor. Again, I'm not a water wastewater professional, so the very quick way to explain that is we have membranes, you pass the water through, and biology. So these big tanks are essentially, we're doing what the stomach biome does. We're creating a sort of a bacterial colony in these tanks that breaks down all the organics in the water. Fast forward, what you're left with is extremely clean, pristine water that you can then recycle back in the building. I'm going to see if this works. You'll see this is an Instagram message from our company page, because if you're not on Instagram, you're not doing business right. So what you're seeing here is a system in the basement of a 40-story building. This is one of our engineers showing you what this water looks like. That was dirty water about 3 hours earlier. It now is clean, pristine water that you scientifically can drink. The regulators are not quite as forward-thinking as we are, but we're working to break through that, what we call in the industry the Yuck Factor. So I recently served recycled, I worked with NASA to basically create a batch of recycled water that we then made beer out of, and we served that beer at a conference. Now I'll say about 80% of people were very good drinking that recycled water beer. About 20% got a little squeamish, but our goal by next conference, we'll take that up to 85%, and we'll keep on getting better. This is actually the before and after. And again, apologies for folks eating. I'll get off this slide really quick. But this is what science can do. This is what we can sort of harness with science, creating this, these amazing approaches. Now, we'll talk a little bit about why you don't see more of these systems yet. And again, this is where politics comes back into play. But I also wanted to show you this. It's one thing to tell you that we're taking wastewater organics and turning them into upcycled organics. No one knows what that means. So we built a garden in an old Honda dealership in downtown San Francisco to show people what we can do with these wastewater organics. Now I can tell you, I've seen the shift in people's thinking. We brought in big contractors with steel-toe boots who walk into our epic showcase garden telling us that we're just a bunch of kooky environmentalists who are doing disgusting things. And by the end of it, they are eating tomatoes out of our repurposed toilet planters. It's all about education. It's all about getting people thinking about these issues in a way that they haven't before. We understand that this is pretty outside of the box. I also understand the squeamishness that comes with discussing toilets and everything else, but it's why we lean into it. We want to sort of help people get over the yuck factor. I'm going to show you a few projects, and by the way, I want to save a lot of time today to have a conversation. I know this is a new topic, so we'll be wrapping up with the images here soon. But just to give you a sense of the types of projects that are now incorporating this. This is not theoretical. This is not down the road. This is now happening in real time. Now, I don't have any favorite projects because every project is like a child, and I love them all equally. But I twist my arm. This one here in San Jose, this is a 1.2 million square foot building that is literally covered on all sides by living wall. We will be recycling water about 25,000 gallons a day and irrigating every single square inch of greenery on that building with recycled water. And we're actually going to be tweaking our formulation to leave plant nutrients in that water. So we are going to be fertilizing and irrigating, or fertigating, this living wall, all with the technology in the building. Now, politics and why it's so relevant. When I left federal politics, I did not realize just how much politics comes into play in water. I think we've all seen the movie Chinatown. I don't know, maybe Maisie hasn't seen Chinatown, but you'll see it. So water is an extremely complicated issue. It's actually one of the things I learned, when we see the partisan divide today, you see that also very pronounced when it comes to water. And when I started learning about these issues and started learning about why is it that we have to spend $1 trillion over the next 20 years to overhaul our infrastructure, I wanted to get to the source of sort of how did we get to this point? All of our pipes, all of our facilities were built anywhere from 30 to 100 years ago. It's again why I included our prospector friend in an earlier slide. And a lot of what it comes down to is if you're an elected official and you're trying to get elected to office, it is a lot sexier to say, I'm going to fix our libraries and our schools than I'm going to overhaul our wastewater infrastructure, dig up the street, and mess up your morning commute. So we've had decades and decades of deferred maintenance, of repairs that didn't happen that should have happened. And it's led to us sort of being in this sort of ballooning moment where, there's not a lot of good news when it comes to water, wastewater. Obviously, we're hearing a lot about the drought now. One of the things I do for my work is I set Google alerts for all things water, wastewater, sludge, you name it. There's very, very little good news that comes into my inbox every single day. But fortunately, it's changing. And it's actually starting here in San Francisco. What's very cool about this meeting right here is that San Francisco is very literally launching a water reuse revolution by being the first city in the country, and don't worry too much about this text, we are the first city in the country to actually require that new large buildings have to have on-site water recycling. Very first country in the entire very first city in the entire country, and I can tell you, traveling around the world, the entire world is now looking at San Francisco as a model for how cities need to be designed for the next 10, 20, 100 years. So the basic premise of this, which was introduced, was we were looking, this is in the previous drought, is we looked around, we said, we're in the middle of a drought, why are we using fresh water from Hetch Hetchy to flush our toilets when we could be manufacturing water on site for non-drinking uses? That then got adopted. It is now in practice. And we realize, though, that San Francisco is not enough. San Francisco is doing amazing things, but we need to be a model for more cities, more states. So for 2 years, our company has worked behind the scenes to help pass something that became known as Senate Bill 966. Because again, I'm going to make an analogy to solar. So everyone is aware of Solar City, of Sunrun, of putting solar on the top of your houses. Solar technology has been around for 70 years. That's not new. What allowed solar to really explode was regulations, was adopting regulations that allowed for the growth of the solar industry and business model innovation. When Solar City came and said, we're going to do a no money down arrangement, you pay as you save over time, all of a sudden the solar industry exploded. We're in this exact same situation when it comes with water and wastewater. We've had the technologies for decades. That's not the problem. It's getting the regulators to understand that these things need to be implemented, and it's getting business models that actually work for business owners. And so what we're seeing now is a sort of explosion of interest in water and wastewater because we've started hitting on those three things. It's the business model, it's the regulation, and it's the technology all coming to play. So in California, we then, about 2 years ago, got something passed which now will allow any city in California that wants to do something like San Francisco can do so. And the state is going to come up with a uniform playbook for how that happens. California is a big market. It's not enough. These are some of the other places now in California and outside that are now adopting similar programs. And what's very, very exciting is actually as of a few weeks ago, San Francisco now updated their regulations. Any new large building over 100,000 square feet in San Francisco will have an on-site water recycling system. So we are very excited that San Francisco, aka the home of University High School, is leading the way internationally for basically setting the stage for what will be the future of how cities are designed when it comes to water, when it comes to wastewater. And my goal sort of in this life, as you mentioned earlier, is to make sure that everyone has access to clean water and reliable sanitation. It is a basic human right. It's something that, frankly, we take for granted here. But we are at a point now where if we don't change the way we're doing things, when we get into the next drought, we may not come out of it so well. But I remain optimistic. I was talking with someone earlier about this, which is that water has been sort of ignored for a lot of reasons. People don't really pay attention to these issues, but we are now seeing an absolute renaissance in folks focusing on this issue in a way they haven't. And what we're really looking forward to is partnering with folks in this room, but also having the next generation of entrepreneurs like Macy, who is interested in water, who are going to take everything we're doing today and take it to the next level. And I think that's why when I learned that University High School is going to be doing more education around STEM, around water issues, I'm very optimistic that all of these problems that I'm talking about today will be the problems of yesterday in just a few decades. And so I think on that note, I'm going to stop and we'll open it up for questions. But again, I want to thank you all, especially for those of you who are brave enough to eat while I was showing you some of these more colorful slides. But yeah, I think with that, we have some time for questions?
Yeah, we have time for questions. And Aaron, I would just ask you to repeat anyone's questions.
Sure.
And I have a question, but I'll let someone else go first.
Is there anything that we can do about buildings that are already built to retrofit them, or is this only practical for new construction?
Yeah, no, so it's a great question. So the question was, is there anything we can do for existing buildings? Is this only for new construction? So the short answer is yes. You can do this in retrofits. I can't say which buildings yet, but there's some buildings in San Francisco that are very prominent in our skyline that are exploring putting this into their buildings. But beyond just building, I talked a lot about residential buildings and office buildings, but really this is any structure. A data center, for example. Data centers are exploding. Every single company needs data centers. Data centers on average use about the same amount of water as a 50,000 person city. They use all that water for cooling. So data centers, wineries, our winemakers are being very hard hit by this pandemic. The combination of wildfires ruining crops, little access to water because of the drought. So, even wineries now are looking into wastewater. Anchor Brewing, our oldest brewery in the city, just installed an on-site water reuse system at their brewery. But even community scale. I'm moving beyond San Francisco, for example, in Hawaii. We all know Hawaii, a beautiful place to be, a nice place to stay. Hawaii has 90,000 cesspools in the state of Hawaii. They are basically an ecological disaster when it comes to wastewater. We've lost about 90% of the coral off the coast of Hawaii because wastewater is not being treated. But we're now looking at on-site reuse, which is sort of the catch-all term for what companies like ours are doing, of moving away from the conventional approach of building a big, massive facility, instead building smaller distributed hubs. Hawaii, I think, is going to be the future of sort of distributed water and wastewater treatment. And by the way, Hawaii is sending their officials to San Francisco to learn how to do this right. So again, very proud of San Francisco. Jim.
How far down the chain do you get? Right now, the big buildings. How far down do you get from that and individual homes?
So Jim is asking about, can we move from buildings into individual homes? The short answer is, probably more efficient than individual homes is community scale. Can we have little systems that can service 150 homes in a single area? Because again, you have to think about, if we do every single individual home, then that means you're going to have to build individual systems for every home. That's a lot of carbon emissions. It's a lot of work that goes into that when you can have that same system with just bigger tanks servicing multiple buildings. And plus, on the other side, on the maintenance side, a lot easier to have a maintenance team go and handle one system versus 150 systems at multiple homes. But there are home systems that exist, and a lot of people do it. San Francisco gives incentives for it. But in terms of this type of technology, which is a little bit more advanced, it's usually better to do it sort of in sort of a district approach. But if you want one in your home, I will personally come and we can take a look.
It's not about going down the chain. Let's go up the chain for a second. What do you see as being the future, or the sort of best future for regulatory policy for guaranteeing what you call the water rights? They have
Yeah. No, so it's a really excellent question. So the question is about water rights. People who lay claim to, and again, water rights here versus water rights in other parts of the world, it's a different conversation. But here in this country, we essentially have a pretty antiquated system where effectively, if you got to the land first, you put a flag down, you own those water rights. Now they can be sold, they can be traded, but that's still the system in place today, which is why you do see very large farmers in California who are just buying up water rights and essentially own all of the water. This is a controversial topic for sure, and I'm glad we're not at a water conference, because if we were, there would be people screaming at each other before I could even say anything. We do need to overhaul water rights policy, because essentially what we have is a regulatory framework in place developed 300 years ago that isn't, it's not suited to deal with a 21st century reality. The water rights were developed at a time when California was a bunch of settlements and people looking for gold, not a 40 million person state, where we do need to think about equity, making sure everyone can get access to water. I think you said something interesting, which is that, are we going to start seeing more and more conflicts? I mean, we already are. Take a look at the Syrian civil war. If you look at sort of the roots of what caused all of that strife that ended up turning into the Syrian civil war, it was farmers who didn't have access to water. When those farmers lost their livelihoods, they started moving into the cities. Then you have poor farmers out of work in the city. You're seeing a clash of societies, sort of a class war that eventually then turned into the Syrian civil war, which has now rendered Syria existing only on maps. The Syria that we knew a decade ago is no longer in existence today. And then again, it all started with water. The good news is that a lot of these technologies, a lot of these ways of thinking that we're developing are making their way to the Middle East. I think Israel, as one example, is now water independent. Now, what I mean by that is that they are not reliant on whether or not it rains to know if they will have enough water for their communities. Israel recycles 90% of all of their wastewater, meaning 90% of the wastewater that goes down into the pipes is treated and reused largely for agriculture. In this country, we're at about 3%. Now, on the one hand, unfortunate, but the way I see it, we got a lot of work to do, and there's a lot of potential for us to do better. But we can connect offline about the water rights issue. It's really, really complicated, but the short answer is it needs to be reformed. Hi.
Can you talk about funding? You mentioned the bill, the Gates Foundation,
Mm-hmm.
and the infrastructure bill. Is the funding for these projects more coming from public sources or government sources, or are they self-sustaining as far as?
Yeah, no, so the question was about funding. How does all of this get paid for? So I'll come back to the infrastructure bill, the Build Back Better plan, the $55 billion figure I mentioned. So again, it's a very, very healthy number, but it's a fraction of 1 trillion, which is what we need to spend. It's a lot of that money is going to go towards big projects, towards big facilities, towards really just repairing the infrastructure that we already have in place. But 90% of all spending on water and wastewater infrastructure is done at the local level. It's meaning if a utility needs to upgrade their pipes and their facilities, they can't rely on the federal government for that funding, so they will increase the water and sewer bills for folks like real estate developers, which is why we have a business, because we are helping developers to save money while also taking strain off the central utilities. But most of the funding sort of federally is going to come from a combination of the federal government, but 90% from the local level. That being said, you're seeing more and more philanthropic giving into water and wastewater, especially in overlooked communities. I think, Marianne and I were talking about, for example, in the Rust Belt, there is a community that we're working with in Alabama. This is a community, a very poor community. There is no federal fund. Well, let me rephrase that. They got federal funding, and the plan was to build a 20-mile pipeline from this rural community to an existing wastewater treatment plant. They spent about $9 million with federal funding doing that. Total failure. Didn't work. And that community is, again, without water and wastewater. Now you're seeing a combination of philanthropic sources and private sources coming in to help them get those systems in place. So it's really sort of a big combination of things. What I'll say that's sort of very heartening for me is that a lot of people hear about tech. You hear about tech investment. Y Combinator, if anyone's heard about that, sort of the big, sort of the startup accelerator. Water had, by my count, about 3 accelerators globally about 10 years ago. So again, not a lot of work fostering water innovation. There's 15 today. And we're seeing more and more investment going into it. So you see it from a lot of different sources, but the bottom line is right now it's just not enough. So we're going to need, there's about 50 times more investment going into energy than water right now, and we're trying to change that.
As a follow-up on that, what is the business model for builders? Do they just save money, or how many decades does it take to recoup it? Like,
Yeah.
From a business perspective, how does it work?
Yeah, so essentially what's the business case for on-site water recycling in a building? As much as I would like to say, developers and building owners are going to do this out of the goodness of their heart, we know that that's not how things work. And frankly, I'm glad that that's not how things work. Because to be a true sustainable business, a business in sustainability, you need to hit the 3 Ps, people, planet, profits. You need to save people money, you need to be good for the planet, and you need to be a viable business. So the basic model is that these folks are paying water and sewer bills every single day. So when you use less water, you pay less for it. When people install a system like ours, they're going to be using about anywhere from 50 to 95% less water, meaning that it's 50 to 95% of their water that they can recycle on site and don't have to pull in from city sources. So they're going to be paying less on their bills. And then I think we do have a few developers in the room who are familiar with capacity charges and impact fees. Those are those one-time fees you pay to the city before you put a shovel in the ground. Those are based on how much water are you going to use and how much wastewater you're going to send into the city. We are able to come in and say, look, they're going to be putting in 50% less wastewater, using 50% less water. They should be paying correspondingly less. So we're seeing that with an approach like this, we can save folks anywhere from a few $100,000 to a few $1 million every single year. We have one project we're working on now where we're going to be saving them $12 million over a 10-year period. So it's the reduction of all their bills.
Was that enough to pay for the project?
In many of these cases, these systems are paying for themselves within 3 to 5 years, which for a large building system is very fast. Yes?
You mentioned how heat is lost
Mhm.
and in the process of, there's a huge loss in energy.
Mhm.
Is there some way that you can to put this to use or to divert it in some way, and are you doing that?
So the question, I was very excited about it, and I was about to jump into the answer. So the question was about recovering heat from this wastewater in these buildings and what we do about that. So, if anyone has ever walked on the sidewalk, especially on a cold night, you see steam coming up through the grates. That is all heat from wastewater. That is energy that we are losing. So the short answer is yes, we are putting these into buildings. So we can actually capture all of the heat from showers, from dishwashers that come into our tanks, all this energy sitting there. We can take some of that heat out and actually use it to preheat the hot water in the building. So just by preheating the water by 1 or 2 degrees, you add that up over time, there's huge amounts of savings on energy bills for these systems. Because look, it's great to be reusing water, but if you're not thinking about the energy too, then it's not going to work out. And one thing that's very, long term, what we're trying to do here is get to a place where Northern California and Southern California can be self-sufficient. Right now, we pump water from Sacramento to San Joaquin Delta, 2,000 feet over mountains down to Southern California. We don't talk about this a lot, but there's a really big earthquake and we cut that water line. LA has not a lot of time before they're going to run out of water. So we want to get to a place where Northern California and Southern California will be self-sufficient. Everyone can have their own locally sourced water supplies, will be more resilient, and about 10% of all of our energy in the state goes to pumping water and treating water. All of a sudden, we have buildings that are basically their own wastewater treatment facilities producing energy. We're going to bring down those GHG emissions a lot, which is, this is sort of the early days. This is the next frontier of recycling. So all of this stuff is new, but you're in the next 5 years, you're going to be seeing this all over the place.
You, with your plumbing, politics to plumbing analogy, could you articulate what it was politically that made San Francisco such a success story?
Yes. So the question is, what made San Francisco such a success story? One is that we have a very forward-thinking. We're very fortunate to have one of the most forward-thinking utilities in the country. The San Francisco Public Utilities Commission is literally the standard bearer nationally, internationally, for how utilities should be run. This is not something that happens overnight, and I think that's sort of one thing I mentioned is that all of these sort of big political, these political wins that I referenced, they take years and years to happen. But I think San Francisco did it, out of necessity. They realized that sort of for the long term, we were not going to have enough water to supply to our city, when the next drought hits. And what we're seeing is we're having more frequent droughts and they're lasting for longer. So I think, frankly, it's pioneering leadership. I'm going to give a lot of credit to a woman named Paulie who runs our SF Water Resources, who basically is the architect of this entire program. And she worked with industry, with utilities to make it happen. But I think it's just being a forward-thinking government.
Was it a private decision or a vote?
This would be a vote, so the Board of Supervisors. Well, in concert with the PUC. Yes?
We visited the water treatment plant down in off of Bayshore.
Mm-hmm.
Are you working with them to a facility like that would be
Yeah, so they actually already have a recycled water capacity there. So again, we have one of the most forward-thinking utilities in the country. So they do have some recycled water capacity. But what happened in San Francisco, and this actually goes to your question, the original plan was to have a big treatment plant producing recycled water and sending it to all these different buildings. If you've ever heard of purple pipes, purple pipes are specifically designed to transport recycled water. They are colored purple so that plumbing contractors don't come and put a drinking pipe to a recycled water pipe. So you just color it differently. The plan was to send it to all these different buildings. What we realized is that that was not going to be feasible. So the city shifted their approach and said, rather than building pipes and digging up streets, we're going to incentivize little on-site systems into these communities and into these buildings to do the same job.
So they're just pumping the recycled water now back into the ocean?
They're pumping it. No, they're actually using it for parks, for some new developments, but it's not enough to feed the whole city. Yes?
What is the impact of some of these systems in the bigger buildings on the LEED certification status? Like, does it elevate it significantly?
Yes. Sounds like you're in the business. So the question was about LEED points, so basically about the environmental certifications of buildings when they install these types of systems. 16 points is what you can get with a system like this. And for those who know LEED, every single point is worth a lot of money. And if you want to get to the highest qualifications, you're going to need to do a lot. But yes, 16 points is when you calculate everything that we're doing from the water savings to the innovation, we can definitely help.
Aaron, thank you so much for an incredible talk. This is a great Runway lecture. Really appreciate your time today and your incredible knowledge, sharing it with our group. My name is Mariana Stark. I'm the Director of Alumni Engagement and Giving at University High School.